I will tell you a wonderful, forgotten story about Columbus and his son. You know, when I was just a boy, I would sit for hours by the shore, watching the sails disappear over the horizon. And I always wondered, what's out there, beyond the water? Is it true that the world is a sphere? Or perhaps, at the edge, there are monsters guarding the world's end? My name is Christopher Columbus. I was born in the Italian city of Genoa, to a family of weavers. My father wanted me to follow in his footsteps and weave cloth, but I dreamed of something far bigger than thread and loom. My heart was drawn to the sea. From an early age, I listened to the stories of old sailors returning from distant lands. They spoke of spices, gold, places where strange people lived and trees grew that no one had ever seen. I learned to read, studied maps, and gazed at the stars searching for answers. The world in the 15th century, what people knew about the earth. Narrator, as Christopher Columbus. The world back then was very different from what we know now. Most people believed that the earth was flat. They thought that if you sailed too far, you'd fall off the edge, lost forever in the vast sea. But I didn't believe that. I had read the works of ancient scholars, and they all pointed to one truth: the earth is round. I believed that if I sailed west, I would reach the Easter lands of spices, gold, and riches that merchants dreamed of. At that time, the world was still a great mystery. People knew of Europe, Asia, and Africa, but beyond that, there was only myth and imagination. And so, the idea of sailing west to reach the east was a bold, even dangerous dream. Yet, I couldn't let go of it. I was convinced that I could find a shorter route to the treasures of the Orient. Seeking support for the journey. Narrator, as Columbus, warmly and thoughtfully, but dreaming of a journey across the ocean is one thing, making it happen is another. I needed ships. I needed men. And most of all, I needed money. I traveled from court to court, from Portugal to Spain, speaking to kings and queens, nobles and scholars. Many of them laughed at me. Sail west to reach the east, they said. That's madness. But I didn't give up. I knocked on every door I could. Years passed long, uncertain years. And just when I began to wonder if the world would ever believe in my vision, I arrived at the court of Queen Isabella of Spain. She listened. She asked questions. And then she paused. For a moment, I thought I would hear the same words, number, but instead, she said, "We will help you. Spain shall give you the ships you need." Can you imagine the joy I felt? After so many rejections, someone finally believed in my dream. She gave me 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They weren't the biggest ships on the sea, but to me they were mighty vessels of hope. And so, in the summer of 1492, with a heart full of courage and a sky full of stars, we set sail into the unknown. The sails were full, the sea was calm, and my heart beat like a drum. As the shore of Spain faded behind us, we were no longer sailors, we were explorers. Dreamers chasing a horizon that had never been touched. Day after day, we sailed westward into endless blue. The ocean stretched in every direction, a mighty desert of waves. It was beautiful and terrifying. The men began to murmur, "How far are we going? What if there's no land? What if we fall off the edge of the world?" Some nights, the sea was like glass beneath a sky of fire, stars burning so brightly you could feel them watching. Other nights, thunder cracked across the heavens and the winds howled like wolves. Waves rose like monsters, crashing over our decks. We fought to hold the ropes. We fought to keep hope alive. I could see the fear in their eyes. And yes, I felt it too, but I could not show it. I stood tall and told them, "Hold fast, the world is round. Land is near, I feel it in my bones." Each sunrise brought new whispers, birds in the sky, driftwood in the water, strange plants floating on the waves. Signs. Then, one morning, a shout rang out from the top of the mast. "Land! Land!" We rushed to the deck, and there, in the golden light of dawn, a shoreline, palm trees swaying in the breeze, sand as white as powdered pearl. My knees gave way, and I whispered, "We have found it." But what we found was far greater than we imagined. First steps on a new world. As our feet touched the soft, sun-warmed sand, it felt like we had landed in a dream. This land, it was unlike anything I had ever known. Lush, green, alive with sounds, birds calling from the trees, wind rustling through leaves as wide as sails. I knelt and kissed the earth. "Thank you, God," I whispered. "Thank you for guiding us to this new world." We planted the flag of Spain and named the island San Salvador, Holy Savior. But what struck me most was not the trees or the flowers or even the sky. It was the people. They stood there at the edge of the forest, watching us. Tall, graceful, their skin bronzed by the sun, dressed in feathers and beads. Their eyes were wide, not with fear, but with wonder. We were as strange to them as they were to us, two worlds, meeting for the very first time. They approached slowly. One of them reached out and touched my arm, gently, like someone touching a flame for the first time. I smiled. They smiled back. We offered beads and bells, mirrors and cloth. They gave us fruit, fresh water, and something more precious, trust. They welcomed us. And in that moment, I thought, perhaps this is what peace between worlds looks like. But even then, deep inside, I knew this discovery would shake the world. This was no path to India. This was something else, a land no European had seen before. A land vast, mysterious, and full of secrets. Next, shall we dive into the exploration of the islands, their richness and mystery, and the realization that this was not Asia. We sailed from island to island, each one more breathtaking than the last. The air smelled of flowers and fruit. The trees were thick with coconuts, bananas, and something sweet I'd never tasted before. They called it pineapple. The rivers ran clear. The mountains watched silently from afar. And everywhere, life. Parrots with feathers like fire, fish that shimmered like coins. And the sound of drums in the distance, deep, steady, ancient. The people, they were gentle, generous, curious. They guided us through forests, showed us how they hunted, fished, and prayed. They spoke of other islands, some peaceful, some ruled by warriors. I wrote everything down. Every tree, every bird, every word they taught us. But even as I marveled, a question began to whisper in the back of my mind. Is this truly India? I had expected to find silk and spices, great cities, gold beyond imagining. But here there were no palaces, no emperors, only nature, untamed and magnificent. Still, I held on to the belief. I called them Indians. I wrote to Queen Isabella, "We have reached the edge of Asia, and the riches of the East are within reach." But in my heart, I began to wonder. The maps did not match. The stars felt strange. The world was larger than I thought. As weeks passed, I knew it was time to return. I had to bring news of our discovery and proof: gold trinkets, carved masks, brightly colored feathers, fruits, and a few of the native people. They came willingly, curious about our world as we were of theirs. But the ocean, once calm and guiding, had turned restless. Storms rose black clouds like curtains across the sky, waves like towers crashing over the deck. The Santa Maria, she did not survive. She struck a reef one night, not far from shore. I stood on her deck, helpless, as the wood groaned and cracked, water rushing in like cold fingers. We saved what we could. I thanked the sea that most of my men lived. We left some behind on that island, La Navidad, building a small fort from the ship's broken bones. I promised I'd return. I had to. The Nina and the Pinta turned homeward, and as we crossed the Atlantic again, this time eastward, my thoughts raced faster than the wind. What had we done? What had we found? We arrived in Spain months later, ragged, sunburnt, exhausted, and victorious. And oh, how the people cheered. Bells rang, crowds gathered. I stood before Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, bowed low, and said, "Your Majesties, I have opened a door to a new world." Gold glittered on the table. The native men, dressed in their finest feathers, stood silently beside me. Their eyes scanned the palace, wide, unsure. I gave the monarchs parrots and fruits, gifts and tales of untouched islands. They smiled. But in their eyes, I saw something else. Ambition. This was no longer just discovery. It was conquest, power, empire. The second voyage, not a journey, but an invasion. The second voyage, oh, how different it was. This time, I did not leave with 3 small ships and uncertain hope. No, I returned with 17 vessels, over 1,000 men. Soldiers, priests, craftsmen, nobles, all hungry for glory, for land, for gold. They didn't come to explore. They came to claim. I remember standing at the bow of the flagship, wind in my face, and thinking, this is not the same journey. This is not the same sea. The ocean still rolled beneath us, but now it carried ambition on its waves. The men laughed loudly, their eyes gleaming with greed. Some carved crosses into the wood of the ships, others sharpened their blades. When we reached the islands, the drums no longer sounded joyful. The people watched us with caution, their eyes remembering. I searched first for La Navidad, the fort we had built, the men I had left behind. But what we found chilled me to the bone. Ashes. The fort was gone, burned, silent, bones scattered in the grass. My men, all dead. Some had taken native women. Others, I heard, had demanded gold. Perhaps they had thought themselves gods. But the islanders, they fought back. And so, trust died. In its place, fear. I gave the order. We would build a new settlement, La Isabella, named for our queen. We would try again. But the dream I once carried had begun to fracture. Now the men demanded results. Where is the gold, Admiral? They asked. Where are the cities? The treasures you promised? They were not content with coconuts and parrots. They wanted riches, power, control. And slowly, reluctantly, I gave them what they wanted. We began to take, to claim, to conquer. And I, who once dreamed of stars and horizons, became a governor of disappointment and blood. The dream unravels. I had dreamed of glory, of charting stars and drawing new maps for the world. But what I found was chaos. La Isabella was a wound carved into paradise. The soil refused to yield crops. Disease spread like wildfire. The men who had once cheered me now grumbled in corners. They called me a liar, a fool, a tyrant. You promised cities of gold, they spat. You brought us to rot in the jungle. Some refused to obey. Others stole from the stores. Fights broke out, knives drawn, guns fired. And between us and the native people, a gulf had opened. No longer did they meet us with smiles. They saw the iron in our hands, the fire in our eyes. Some still traded peacefully, but many vanished into the forests. Some resisted, some were captured. Yes, I must speak it truly now, for the tale must be told in full. We began taking slaves, shackling the very people who had once offered us fruit and water with open hands. Some were sent to Spain in chains. Some died before they ever saw the shore. That was not my dream, I swear it. But the men demanded gold, demanded proof. The crown waited, impatient. So I turned my head. I justified. I told myself, it is the price of empire. But in the dark, when sleep would not come, I heard the drums again, not of joy, but mourning. And the ocean, once my ally, now watched me in silence. The third voyage. I set out again a third time in 1498. But by then, I was no longer a hero. Whispered rumors followed me. The crown grew impatient. Some said I had lied. Others said I ruled the Indies like a cruel king. And yet, I still believed. I still searched. This time, we sailed farther south. And then one morning, we saw something new. A vast coastline, broader than any island. Rivers so wide they seemed to pour from the sky itself. Birds black as night, fish that flew above the water, a land untouched. It was South America, though I did not yet know the name. I knelt on that soil and wept. Still, I whispered, there are wonders left in the world. But I could not stay long. The colony called me back, and when I returned to Hispaniola, I found rebellion. My own men had risen against me, said I was too harsh, too proud, that I ruled with iron where I should have offered gold. Soon after, royal ships arrived, but they did not come with supplies. They came with chains. I, the admiral of the ocean sea, was taken in shackles, bound hand and foot, returned to Spain not in glory but as a prisoner. And yet, even as I sat in a dark cell, I smiled, for I knew what they did not. The world had changed, and I had helped it turn. The final voyage one last horizon. In 1502, aged and weary, I begged the crown for one final chance. Not for riches, not for glory, just one more voyage. And they agreed. I took my son with me, a boy with eyes full of questions as mine had once been. We sailed along Central America, fought through hurricanes, were stranded on the shores of Jamaica for nearly a year. Disease claimed many, food ran low, but I kept going. Because even then, even in pain, even forgotten, I could not stop chasing the horizon. And when we returned home at last broke, tired and weathered, I knew my part of the story was ending, the legacy what we left behind. I died in 1506, quietly, without fanfare. But long after my bones turned to dust, ships kept sailing, maps kept growing. The old world met the new, and the world, as we knew it, would never again be the same. Yes, there was pain, there was darkness, mistakes I cannot deny, but also wonder. For a boy from Genoa, who once watched sails vanish into the sunset, lived to cross an ocean no European had ever dared and returned to tell the tale. And perhaps that is a kind of happy ending. Not of golden crowns, but of courage, of wonder, of opening the world, reflections on a divided soul. I often ask myself, late at night in my mind, was I a bringer of light or shadow? They call me discoverer, some call me butcher. I suppose in time we are all judged by more than our intent. When I first saw the islands, saw the people, I felt awe, not conquest. I wanted to learn their ways, their languages, their wisdom, but the world I served was not patient. The court, the crown, the merchants, they demanded results, metal, submission. And I was trapped in between, a sailor at heart, a governor by force. I knew how to navigate storms. I did not know how to govern men who had forgotten honor. And yes, I allowed things I should not have. I bowed to greed. I chose silence when I should have shouted. That I carry, but I also carried maps no one had ever drawn, sailed waters no European had ever crossed, saw skies untouched by chart or compass. And I listened, truly listened, to languages born in forests and sung beside fires older than cathedrals. I do not excuse the wrong, but I will not let the wonder be forgotten. A moment with the sea and a boy. There is a moment I remember, just before my final voyage. I was walking the docks alone, cloak pulled against the wind. My bones ached. Age had settled in like barnacles on old wood. A boy approached me, barefoot, maybe 9 or 10. "Are you the Admiral?" he asked, eyes round with awe. I nodded. "You found the new world?" I smiled. "A small part of it." He looked toward the ships. "Do you think there are more islands still out there? More stars we haven't followed?" I placed my hand on his shoulder and said, "There are always more stars. That boy will never be remembered by name, but I think of him more than kings, for in his eyes I saw what first lit the fire in me, curiosity. And that, I believe, is what drives us beyond maps and empires. Not greed, not war, but the simple, burning need to know what's out there, what's next. The nature of discovery. Discovery is not a clean thing. It is not quiet. It stirs the earth. It breaks old walls. To discover is to disturb. Yes, I disturbed a world. I changed it. For better or worse? I'll let time answer that. But I hope, oh, how I hope that others will walk with softer feet where I once marched in boots. That they will listen more, take less, share more. And yet, I also hope they never stop sailing, because the world is still full of unknown shores. They may not lie across oceans anymore, but they lie within the heart, the mind, the courage to ask questions no one has dared to ask. If my story teaches anything, let it be this. It is better to sail and stumble than to stay and rot on shore. The legacy in the hands of others. After I died, others took my maps, my name, my tales. Some used them to build, others to destroy. And strangely, it was not even my name that stayed. A cartographer named Amerigo Vespucci later gave his to the land I touched. America, not Colombia, but that does not hurt me, for I never set out to name the world, only to see it. And now, I am part of it, not in statues, not in scrolls, but in the waves. Every ship that dares the open sea carries a shadow of my sail. Every child that looks to the horizon with wonder walks in my wake. Let them judge me as they will, but let them keep sailing. Oh, fade to soft music, ocean sounds, a final, gentle voice, and thus the sailor who dreamed of the stars sailed into them. The Admiral's Son, the tale of Diego Colon. Let me tell you a story that few remember. Not about the admiral who crossed the great ocean sea, no. That tale has been told 1,000 times. This is the story of the boy he left behind. A boy born in the wake of waves, in the silence after the sails had passed. His name was Diego Colon, and he bore his father's name like an anchor, heavy, noble, unrelenting. A child of salt and silence. Diego was born not in glory, but in longing. While his father, Christopher Columbus, sailed off into legend, the boy remained in Spain, far from the unknown islands, far from the burning sun and whispering palms of the Indies. He grew up in the court of Queen Isabella, not as a prince or nobleman, but as a page, a polite, quiet child with wide eyes and too many questions. Other boys played with swords. Diego watched the wind. "Will he come back?" he would ask the nursemaids. "Your father is building a world," they would answer. And in the lonely hours, he would trace maps with his finger. He would whisper island names he had never seen. Hispaniola, Cuba, Cipango. His father wrote letters when he could. They were strange and fierce, full of complaints about rebels and gold, about broken promises and divine missions. But between the lines, there was love. "Diego, my son, the sea is cruel but just. I make it tame for you. One day you will walk where I have sailed." The boy believed him. The fall of the admiral. Then came the chains. The man who had opened the new world returned to Spain not in triumph, but in disgrace, accused of cruelty, dismissed as mad, his titles stripped, his legacy tarnished. And Diego watched the fire in his father dim. "I gave them a world," Christopher muttered, "and they gave me shackles." Diego was 14. He stood tall beside his father, even as the courtiers turned their backs, even as the queen grew cold, even as others, new explorers, hungry noblemen, rushed to carve their names across the maps that once belonged to the admiral. By the time the old man died in 1506, Diego had already made his vow. "I will restore our name. I will finish what he began." But Spain does not easily forgive. A forgotten heir. Christopher Columbus had been promised titles Viceroy, Admiral, Governor of the Indies for himself and his heirs in perpetuity. But promises written in ink fade fast when gold enters the room. After the admiral's death, those promises were forgotten. The crown kept the lands, the wealth, the ships. They gave Diego a small pension, a polite smile, a quiet dismissal. But Diego was not quiet. He studied law. He watched the courts. He learned diplomacy like a weapon. And then he sued the Spanish crown. Yes, a young man barely in his 20s dared to drag the most powerful monarchy in Europe into court, demanding the restoration of his father's titles, the lands his family had been denied, and the right to govern the New World as heir to the admiral. It was bold, arrogant, dangerous, and yet it worked. Years of trials, appeals, whispers in corridors, royal advisors swaying left and right. And in 1508, Diego Colon was named governor of the Indies. He had won, but winning on parchment is not the same as ruling on soil. Across the ocean, into the storm. Isaiah, chapter 4. A governor with no crown. He had the title, Governor of the Indies. It sounded powerful, like a man who ruled oceans, who commanded fleets and cities. But Diego quickly learned, titles are paper and power is muscle. The Spanish crown still sent judges and secretaries to advise him. Old enemies of his father lingered in colonial courts, and every captain, every nobleman who crossed the sea thought he knew better. Still, Diego did not flinch. He left Spain, bringing with him his young wife Maria de Toledo, niece to the powerful Duke of Alba. This was no minor alliance. By marrying into one of the most respected noble houses of Castile, Diego made it clear the Colon name would not be cast aside. And so, in 1509, Diego Colon stepped ashore in Santo Domingo, capital of Hispaniola, once the crown jewel of his father's discovery. The air was hot, heavy, and filled with whispers. Some welcomed him. Many did not. The New World burns. The Indies were no longer new. By the time Diego arrived, the gold rush had turned to blood. Encomienda's brutal systems of forced labor ground the native Taino people into dust. Spanish settlers squabbled like wolves over land and titles. Priests argued about souls. Soldiers hunted for gold. It was chaos dressed as a colony. And now, they expected a young man, barely 30, to control it. Diego walked the halls where his father once ruled. He sat in the governor's chair, the same his father had been dragged from in chains. And he made decisions. Some say he was harsh. Others say he tried to be fair, tried to find balance between the settlers' greed and the natives' cries. He built roads, forts, courts. He spoke with friars. He heard complaints. He delivered justice, or what passed for it in those brutal years. But nothing came easily. Shadows in the court. In Spain, Diego still had enemies. The Council of the Indies, newly formed to oversee colonial matters, often questioned his authority. They claimed he was too proud, too stubborn, too much like his father. But Diego was a Colon. He fought with words, not swords. He wrote letters, sent envoys, pleaded, demanded, maneuvered. He even returned to Spain in 1515, just 6 years after taking power, not to rest, but to defend his rule. Back and forth he went across the ocean, across the years caught between two worlds, one of blood and jungle and gold, the other of ink and politics and betrayal. Yet through it all, he held fast to his purpose. I am the Admiral's son. I do not kneel. I do not vanish. And somehow, through storms of greed and treachery, he stayed standing. The price of power. Power is a strange thing. You fight for it. You bleed for it. And when you finally hold it, it begins to slip through your fingers. Diego returned to the New World, determined to govern with wisdom and strength. But the land had changed, and so had the people. New governors were being appointed behind his back. Expeditions set sail without his consent. Rumors spread that Diego was unfit, that his father's titles should have died with the man himself. And yet he held his post. Through drought, rebellion, and endless quarrels with settlers who saw him as an obstacle, not a leader. Sometimes, alone at night, Diego would walk the shores of Santo Domingo. He would stare into the sea. He came from over that horizon. He would whisper to himself, speaking of his father, and they never forgave him for it. The Admiral's grandson, despite the storms, Diego built a family. His wife, Maria de Toledo, was strong, clever, and fiercely loyal. They had children, including a son named Luis. Diego poured his hopes into the boy. One day, he told him, "They will call you Admiral of the Ocean Sea. You will wear the stars your grandfather earned." But Spain still whispered, and the crown was growing restless. They sent officials to limit Diego's power. They claimed he was clinging to titles too grand, demanding rights too old. Some even said softly, carefully, that the Colon family had grown inconvenient. It was death by 1,000 papers. The quiet end. By 1523, after years of struggle, Diego was ordered back to Spain again. He returned not in chains like his father, but not in triumph either. His health was failing, his voice hoarse, his fire dimmed. He petitioned once more to have his rights restored fully. He spoke not just as a man, but as a legacy, as the son of the one who had opened the world. But the world had moved on. On the 23rd of February, 1526, Diego Colon died in Spain, far from the Indies, far from the waves that had shaped his life. No great bell tolled, no parade followed. But in the quiet corners of court, some still whispered. That was the Admiral's son, and he never gave up. The last heir. Luis Colon was just a boy when his father died. He didn't remember the lawsuits, the voyages, the bitterness, but he remembered the silence in his mother's eyes. He had inherited more than a name. He had inherited a wound. Spain, now under the rule of Emperor Charles V, had become even more vast, more powerful, and more indifferent. To most, the name Colon was now a historical footnote. But not to Luis. "My father died defending the promise made to my grandfather," he said. "I will not let it be broken." He had lawyers, advisors, influence through his mother's noble family. So he did what every Colon seemed destined to do. He went to court. The Pleito Colombino. This was no ordinary legal case. The Pleito Colombino, as it became known, was one of the most famous inheritance disputes in Spanish history. It had begun with Diego. Now Luis carried it forward. He demanded recognition as Viceroy of the Indies, as his grandfather had been promised, ownership of territories discovered by Columbus, titles, privileges, lands, everything. The court dragged on. Witnesses came forward, explorers, friars, former governors. Old letters were read aloud. Maps were unrolled. Even the Queen's original contracts with Columbus were brought out, yellowed and cracking. Years passed. Some days, it felt as though the entire legacy of the Age of Discovery rested in the hands of one young man. The settlement. In 1536, a ruling came. It was not a full victory, but it was not a defeat. Luis Colón was granted the noble title Duke of Veragua. He received vast estates in the New World. He was made a marquis, given income, lands, and royal recognition. But the hereditary titles of Viceroy and Admiral of the Ocean Sea, gone. The crown had bought back its promises with gold, not honor. Some said Luis had sold his birthright. Others said he had saved what was left of it. Luis chose peace. He built a quiet life in Spain, far from the storms his father and grandfather had endured. But in his home, he kept a globe, and on it there was a single name carved deeper than the rest. Colón. Time rolled on, as time always does. New names filled the maps. New kings. New colonies. New dreams. The name Columbus faded into textbooks. The name Colón, whispered still in noble houses, became a line of quiet dukes and marquises who never again ruled oceans. But in the heart of history, something remains. 3 men. A grandfather who dared to sail west when others feared falling off the world. A father who stood tall in the face of betrayal and fought for his family's honor with law and faith. And a son who accepted the weight of legacy and chose peace over pride. What remains? So what did they leave behind? Not just maps, not just titles or cities. They left behind a lesson that greatness is not only in discovery, but in defending the truth when others would erase it. That courage is not only on the sea, but in the courtroom, the letter, the whispered prayer at night. That a name, Colón, can be buried under sand and ink, but never truly silenced. And perhaps, in some corner of your own spirit, you carry a bit of them too. So when you hear the name Columbus, remember not just the sailor, remember the boy he left behind, the man that boy became, and the son who made peace with the weight of it all. Remember Diego Colón, the admiral's son. And remember this, the waves take many things, but not stories. Never the stories.